The ATC. Hi, I'm Philip Correll, an experienced and qualified design engineer, and I'm going to design with you a new concept in cycling. As I was once a student at Bolton Technical College, I will leave all my construction lines, mistakes and thinking, as that might help you one day if you end up like I did, working in a busy drawing office trying to create a new design from a blank sheet of paper. What we have here is the first ATB Allterrain bike. Certainly in England it was, I don't know about the rest of the world. I did not set out to design this bike as a project, it evolved out of necessity. This photograph dates back to late February or early March 1990 or 91. Yet it looks like the many bikes you see outside any shopping centre or sports centre today. This is probably the world's most popular cycle nowadays. Before I explain to you this cycle, I will give you a history of my involvement with cycling up to this point. I left secondary school at Easter 1976, the year of the heatwave summer, so I would have started after the old 11 plus exam, so I presume 1972 would have been my first year. The bikes I and my two brothers had were the usual kids' bikes, Raleigh, British Eagle and BSA. These were okay but nothing special, and nearly always a tyre punctured. That was an off-putting part of having a cycle, and the inferiority feeling that it was kids' stuff and not real, like motorbikes or cars. A change came in the summer of 1972, because a lad from school who I was friendly with, and lived near me, he rolled up one day with a new, bright yellow Raleigh chopper. From a kid's point of view, this was like something out of a spaceship. I can still see the crowd around it now, with everyone mesmerised by it. Within a month I was playing on a swing in the woods with that lad and a few others, at the back of his house. And another lad said to me, "Your mother's shouting you from the pathway at the top of the woods." As I went up closer, she had a bright blue Raleigh chopper with her. I couldn't take it in at first that it was for me. In all the people at school in all the 4 years, we were the only two that had them. Yet everyone seemed to want one. Another lad came one day with a different bike called a Star Putsch, which everyone described as like a Raleigh chopper. That's where my memories seem to finish, but there are a couple of different points I can still remember. My younger brother Stephen, like me, liked his bikes and still does. One incident I remember is him and his lifelong school friend Mark would cycle along the canal bank to a point where the pathway fell away into the woods, with a long steep downward hill. They will cycle down that a few times as what we would now call downhill. Mark came off his bike and hit his head on a rock, cracking it open. There was no helmets in those days. Stephen had to stop the traffic on the busy A6, which wasn't for stopping. Anyway, a doctor by chance stopped and took them to Chorley Hospital. Another incident I remember is, it might have been the year I left school, so Stephen and Mark would have been 15-year-olds. And after school one Friday night, they went for a ride on the bikes, and it was late when they got back. That was because they had gone to Morecambe, which is 40 miles each way. And it was unusual for school kids to have an 80-mile bike ride in 1976, just for the sake of it. After that, I started work and bought a Yamaha moped, and my interest swapped to motorcycles for the next 20 years. When I did move into the drawing office, at one point I bought a Peugeot racing cycle. As a few at work had them, and I would occasionally cycle the 7 miles to work in the summer. My next involvement with cycling came about by chance. As I came out of a supermarket, and Stephen was locking up his new mountain bike, and he was keen to tell me all about it. There's two things that stick in my mind from that conversation. One is him saying, "This is the best thing I ever bought." And the other thing is, "Do yourself a favour and get one of these." I took him up on that and said, "Okay, Stephen, I will do." I will recommend those statements to anyone now. At the time I did not have any money, as I'd been out of work for about 6 months, Both engineering and the building trade was in recession at the time. I think it was the winter of 1989 or 1990. I did buy some mountain bike magazines, and the basic bikes were around £230, well out of my price range at the time. But I got lucky by scanning the adverts in the local papers and picked one up for £55. It was only a mile from home, so I had my first mountain bike. Not long after that I got lucky again as I got a sniff of a job at a sheet metal company. The work was in the workshop rather than the drawing office, but as I had served my apprenticeship in the workshop before I got qualified for the drawing office, it wasn't a problem, and it was £250 a week, which I needed badly. Crucially for me, it was only 8 miles away on an industrial estate in Leyland, because I'm a bad traveller at the best of times and I didn't have any transport. After an interview and some welding tests on sheet metal and aluminium, I got the job and was set to start. We were into January 1990, or 91 now, and I decided to go on the train, which was 7 a.m. from Chorley to Leyland. This gave me just over 15 minutes to walk from Leyland station to the industrial estate, which was a little over a mile. The first week was going well. I had bumped into a few people I had known from the past and found out the place was okay. I was amongst the new starters and found there was a lot of work on the books, which is just what I wanted to hear. Then Thursday came along and the carpet was pulled from under me as a meeting was called and everyone was told. Due to the delivery pressures of the new orders, the company was moving on to a 3-shift system rather than the current 2-shift system. After looking at the notice board, I found I was on the early 6 a.m. start, as were all the new starters, as this was the least favourable working pattern. I explained to the bosses that the 6 a.m. start was no good for me, as the public transport, bus, train, didn't start at that time. But as I was a new starter, I was told to vote with my feet. If I turn up at 6 a.m. Monday morning, I've got a job. Panic set in. The best solution I could come up with was to go to work on the mountain bike or quit. So I got a set of mudguards and a back rack of Stephen, then bought a gel seat and some lights. I was working that weekend, so I jumped on the tube bender and made some high-rise handlebars. They are not the ones shown in the photograph. They were higher than those shown and eventually cracked as I didn't brace them. They were more like the old car horn type that I had as a kid. But that bike saved my bacon a bit because many times I'd set off at 5 a.m. for an 8-mile bike ride in 2 or 3 inches of snow, work a 12-hour shift, then cycle home in the snow. I did that until mid-March and the snow just seemed to drag on. After about 6 weeks I got called into the office and I was told I wasn't going fast enough. But by then I got to know people and swapped to car sharing. But the Allterrain bike gave me 6 weeks of work, 12 hours a day, and Saturday and Sunday, mostly in the snow. That's why it's called an all-terrain bike. And I would say to you, if you were only able to have one vehicle, I would say get one of them. Significantly, since then, maybe 3 times now, different people have said to me, it's the best thing I ever bought. Something significant dawned on me as well. I'd recently been over to Belfast working at Short Brothers Aircraft Company, which is part of the Bombardier Group, that's recently, in 2018, been in the news. When I came back to England, I had unwittingly become a political target, and there was a saying, politics is a nasty business. I was under constant observation for a while, and maybe due to this, I became aware of a couple of points. When I got the next month's mountain bike magazines, there was kits to transform your mountain bike into what was called an all-terrain bike, a tough, general-purpose bike rather than a dedicated off-road bike. Secondly, I will come outside a shop or a superstore, having parked the bike outside, and someone would be stood there staring at it, trying to figure out what it was, and would usually ask me, what was it, and where could they get one? At that point, I realised I had made the all-terrain bike. Not something I intended to do, it was just me being me. I have wished on many occasions that I had £1 for every one sold. As the year dragged on, I bought a cheap van from the auctions and swapped to the afternoon shift. I did decide though, as it was summer, I would get a few shifts in by going to work on the bike again, as I liked doing it. I bumped into Stephen again and mentioned I was cycling to work again, as I like my bike. He's much like me and cycles a lot, and he said to me, I've got a good deal for you. a specialised hard-rock frame and suspension forks, I could have it for £50. At this point things get serious. I was aware that they are well regarded in the biking circles as a good quality bike. And here it is. I have another one now which will be seen a bit later. The first thing that made an impression on me is just how much faster it was going the 8.5 miles to work on this than my old one was. I would average 26 minutes, not trying to set any records, just going to work in the summer. It was around 34 minutes coming home as there's more uphill work. So this became my standard ride for a while, and I clocked up many miles on this. It was tough and light. I also became aware I did not want to drop below this standard of construction in the future. It's better to have a quality product off a good manufacturer, even if they do cost more. Unlike a car or a motorcycle, you have to power these things, there is no engine, and as such you quickly become aware of weight. The next thing I became aware of was an evolutionary race taking place with the full suspension bikes. I had watched this before with the evolution of the hardtails, or rigid frame to give it its English name. The hard rock frame is typical of the type of frame that won out in that race. Once I had watched a few suspension frame bikes vying for top spot, I formed the opinion that a full suspension frame is not compatible with the concept of a cycle. This might seem at odds with what you think, with what you see all around you, but later in the design stage I will attempt to prove that from an engineer's point of view. Below is the full suspension Coyote ultralight I built. I did a period of going to work 7 days a week for 10 weeks in the summer on this when we were busy, with a round trip of 17 miles, that was 1190 miles in total. The story behind this one is it cost somewhere between $2,000 and $2,250 to build. The frame was at the back end of the first generation lightweight alloy frames, and this had a carbon fibre swing arm. The cost of the frame was originally $580. I paid $280 or $380 for it. I couldn't believe how light the frame was. When I first picked it up, it felt like a Pepsi Coke tin. The hard rock frames are good quality lightweight steel, but one of those would make 3 of the Coyote frames. I put top quality forks on it, XT bombers, top of the range 27 gears, XT gear and brake levers, good wheel rims and tyres. It was really comfortable and fast. I formed the opinion after riding this that a full suspension frame is superior for the roads, as you don't realise how bad the roads are until you ride a bike on them a lot, and then swap from a rigid to a full suspension setup. I rode the arse off this for 18 months, then scrapped it. It was completely and utterly worn out. Everything was knackered. The frame and forks, the most expensive items, are gone. The gears, brakes, tyres, all worn out. I buy a frame now for £40 off eBay. I did buy another full suspension frame after this, which is the one below, but I gave it away when my gears were once again worn out. I've enlarged some details of this frame as they are of a point of interest. If you look at the rear end, it says 6061 heat treated aluminium, but looking at the right image, there's a lot of reinforcement there. There is a thick collar with a bearing supports there. This makes a heavy frame. Later I'll show a Claude Butler aluminium frame, but this Diamondback weighs as much as 3 of those. My life was to make a big change due to an unforeseen event when the gears were worn out on this bike, because for a while I had become disillusioned with the index gearing system on the current bikes. This was with me only having a bike and I'm using it every day. Whilst at first it seems a novel idea, you just click the lever and it jumps into gear, no fiddling about. The whir rates are terrible. The cogs are wafer thin and canted over, so with a click, mechanically it throws a chain off. But for me that means I can go through a complete gear train in 12 months. In the bike shop they will tell you a back cog is not very expensive and easy to replace, which sounds good on the surface, but not when you look a little deeper. By the time you have put on a front chain wheel, plus axle, then a back cog, chain, derailleur, brake pads, you're up to £110. And that's using bottom of the range in quality parts. Also, if you don't spend all day doing all the work yourself, then a shop will charge you at least £80 to do the work, providing you bought the parts off them. I bought a special tool for slackening the back cog off. It didn't fit. It must have been a cheap make. So I took the wheel off, walked down to the shop with it, and a lad in the shop put his tool on it, one crack to slacken it, no more than 10 seconds, and said that would be £10. If you look at any of the big stores on the high street, Argos, Tesco, you can get a good new bike for £110. So daft as it sounds, it makes sense for me every spring, take my bike up to the canal, toss it in, and then walk into the store with my £110 and get a nice shiny new one, no hassle. That is no better than what the car industry is doing, and that type of engineering rubs me up the wrong way. I'm an environmentalist and I've been battling against that type of engineering for the last 25 years. In the late summer of 2013, I ran into another problem. As the gears were once again all worn out, the bike was stuck in one gear. I could use it on the flat or downhill, but I had to get off and walk for the hills. I was short of money and not looking forward to forking out again for yet another gear train, when I got myself involved with an unexpected event. I was going downtown one afternoon. The road I was on had cars parked on both sides, which was usual, and not a particularly wide road. I was on the pavement, which, as usual, was empty, but halfway down the road there were no cars, which was usual. But I stayed on the pavement. Was that laziness or complacency? I don't know, but that's what happened. And I was in a bit of a rush. I was going a bit faster than usual. Then there was a family, a mum, dad, 3 kids, and they were not in a line, and they were spread out all over the place. And I just went round them like skittles. And the dad shouted at me. I'm not sure if he ran after me a bit, but I didn't look back. I just sped up. I realised I was in the wrong and I didn't want a confrontation. And after all that, I was only hurrying down to the betting shop to put a couple of pounds on the afternoon's racing. When I got home, it seemed to upset me a bit, that, and I started thinking a bit deeper. Yes, I will hold my hand up. I'm big enough to admit I was in the wrong. But if you look at things from a deeper perspective, the society that we live in have backed me into a corner. I have kids of my own, and I would be really against them going to school on their bikes. The roads are far too dangerous nowadays. Everyone is in a mad rush, and the traffic has quadrupled from the time when I was a kid. Yet the cycling facilities are non-existent, and the pavement is more often than not, it's empty. And while I said the roads are too dangerous for my kids, what do they say to you about the roads being too dangerous for me? Do you want them to grow up without me? Twice I've been over the bonnet of a car, and 60% of accidents, you get it from behind. I got myself in a real state, recognising it was another example of our stupid attitude of a society that we live in, where the car must come first, and the big conglomerates are walking all over everyone, happy to make big wide roads and shopping centres with big car parks, collect the fees and move on to the next project and stuff everyone else. I decided there and then I'm not going to spend another penny on this bike. I put it away in the shed and walked for what was left of the summer. I got myself into a state, and the best course of action seemed to be walk away from it all, calm down, and get my thinking together. So that's what I did, and I set about rearranging my thinking. Over the next week, as I put the incident behind me, I came upon a realisation I had not thought of before. As I said, I was getting weary of keep throwing good money at these bikes, and recognised that the index gearing system was part of the problem for me, and with the amount of mileage I do. Not only are the cogs wafer thin, but they're also canted over. So when you click the lever, it mechanically throws a chain off, and this gives you a very thin contact area for the chain, and it greatly increases the wear rates of the cogs. When I was a kid, the cogs seemed to be about 1/8 of an inch thick, and with all the bikes we had, I don't even recall seeing a worn-out cog. I concluded one of the old 5-speed gear systems would be a better option for what I need for my daily transport. Another big realisation that I hadn't previously thought about hit me as well. The bike I was using was my second full suspension bike, but it was my 5th Allterrain bike. Right from my very first one, I have 5 one after another, and the last 2 have motocross handlebars on them. If you look again at the picture of the Coyote Ultralight, you can see the wall thickness of the handlebars. These are not cycling handlebars, the Kawasaki motocross bike handlebars. Although you can't put them on your bike, I know a trick. This combined with a high seat position gives a very aggressive ride. My brother Stephen and his friend Mark, they go up Rivington every weekend on the Commonwealth cross-country track. I could do that. The only difference is my tyres are dirt track rather than off-road tyres. I can jump on my bike and do 8 miles to Leyland or 25 miles to Southport. You would want a road bike for that, but it wouldn't really bother me. I use my bike on the road and I can go 3 years without a puncture. I bump up the curb onto the pavement, go over broken glass, down the steps into the park, throw it over a fence, come back along the canal where it's all gravel and mud. It's basically a real go anywhere, do anything bike. Then I'm bombing along the pavement with a bunch of kids on it. There's something wrong there, isn't there? At this point, I had some deep thinking to do. Not only was the environment, what you call the urban environment, that I live in causing me a problem, but my choice of transport that I'd been happy to live with for the last 20 years, that was also part of the problem. I had covered many miles over the last 20 years and I'd learned to set my bike up to fit me like a glove, and I was now facing the prospect of looking for something else. But what else was there out there? I recognised the gearing system for the Allterrain bikes was not suitable for me. I wanted a more robust system, and I didn't need the 21 or 27 gears. The old 5 or 6 speed was all that I needed. But now I have been forced to recognise the bike's stance and its presence on the road was too aggressive, and I should consider a softer, more relaxed attitude to cycling to fit in with the ever-growing trend of cyclists being accepted on the largely empty pavements. So my mind was made up. Like I said, I would not rebuild the bike I had, but instead I would have a look on eBay, which has a big cycling section, and see what else was available. The first train of thought I followed was a cruising bike like the one shown. This was typical of the images I downloaded. You see this sort of thing near a beach all over the world, some girl with shorts on, cruising along the seafront. Although I had seen them many times, I had taken little notice. I never really looked at them in detail. When I did look in more detail, the first thing that struck me was it must have been made by an artist who was looking for a pretty picture for an advertising campaign and who had obviously little interest or experience in engineering. The two main points were the frame construction, the most important item, did not follow engineering principles and was little more than a salesman's gimmick, and the seating position overloaded the knee joint and was only suitable for short journeys along a flat road. But then again, as it's a beachfront cruiser, it says that on the tin, doesn't it? Over the next week or two, I looked at many different trains of thought on cycles, and I came upon a startling discovery, which was that, apart from the hardcore of cyclists, the seat position is wrong, and it did harm rather than good. This next picture will illustrate this. This is a bike I am currently using. As my bike, the second Specialised Hard Rock, I've once again worn out gears, and as it was just before Christmas 2017, I borrowed this off a friend. When you look at this image, what you must bear in mind is I am 6 feet tall, yet look how high the seat must be for it to be in its correct working position. Although you would accept this from the hardcore of cyclists, how happy would you be to watch your mother go down to the shops on her bike if it was set up like this? Not very happy, I would presume. When I was growing up, I was told, like everyone else was, that I should be able to touch the floor with the balls of my feet whilst I was sat in the saddle. That was what everyone said. But while that might be correct from a safety point of view, it's incorrect for the ergonomics of the human body, and it will cause physical harm unless you don't use the cycle very much and only for short distances. Before I move on to the next picture, there is an important point that should make you think very deeply. As I said, I am 6 feet tall, yet the seat, when you look at it, it's well above my waistline. So it's over half the height of my body, and that means I cannot physically get onto this machine unless it is moving. To put that into its real perspective, think about this. If you have a car and you're now thinking about changing it for a new one, but you will only buy one that you cannot get into unless it's moving. Getting complicated now, isn't it? The next important point is, I was browsing the adverts on eBay, which has a large section covering many types of cycles, and I came across some rally choppers. As I said, I had one myself as a kid. What I had never realised was just how much enthusiasm there was for them. I followed a link to a website for them, of which there are several, and I was gobsmacked to find that good condition early ones can go for £3,500. Yeah, £3,500. What is going on here? I know of no other cycle that is treated as a classic car or a motorcycle. People will buy up old ones and restore them to original condition. There is such enthusiasm for them. They have their own websites, owners clubs, and batches of original parts will be made for the owners clubs. It took me by surprise, that one did. The next thing is, what happened to it? Where has it gone? It seems to have dropped off the face of the earth. What I mean by that is, consider the BMX. From what I understand of that, it was made by a NASA engineer as a project for his young son. It proved to be so popular, a manufacturer got involved and it went into production. It ended up carving out its own little world. Race series were formed for them. You may remember seeing them on TV. Kids had leathers and helmets and they would race around the scrambling circuit. All sorts of merchandise came off the back of that little machine. As a project, it proved to be a runaway success. It still is today. Just walk into my local shop and it shows rows of them lined up. As you can see, the shops are full of BMX bikes. It's a bike that came after the chopper and it's still here. Before the chopper, there was racing bikes. They came and they're still here. We have the MTB mountain bike, the ATB, the Allterrain bike, the town bike, which is a softer version of an Allterrain bike, the cruising bike. All of them have come and are still here. The chopper definitely came. I had one myself, and that one has gone. Yet bizarrely, that is the only one that all the collectors are falling over themselves to buy. So that one's confusing, isn't it? A selection of BMX in the local shop. The next picture shows you the correct driving position for your legs. First off, look how high not only my body is, but also the centre of the mass between my body and the machine itself. My leg is in the same position as it would be if I was pushing hard on a spade as I force it into the ground. This gives the powerful leg muscle the chance to come into play, and the force is directed straight down through the big leg bone and the muscles onto the pedal at the extremity of its rotational cycle. As you can see, there is no unnecessary overloading of the knee joint. This will enable me to pull a high gear and cover distance, or a low gear for very steep hills. I can do this day after day without getting any long-term injuries. If the seat was lower, every aspect of cycling would seem like hard work, then my knee joints would pack up. In conclusion, whether you like it or not, your seat has to be in this high position or get another form of transport. Another interesting point springs to mind from this picture. I am 6 feet tall, so I'm large, but not overly large. Yet I have the seat stem all the way up, and I've had to put on the longest handlebar stem that I could find. You would conclude that an extra large frame would be better for me, but someone who is extra large, they would need a mega extra large frame. It's as if they don't want you to have the correct size frame and will prefer you to have the seat in the wrong position. Looking at this picture also confirms what I said about not being able to get on this machine unless it was moving. You can see for yourself, if my foot was on the floor, there is no way I could physically reach over the seat. At this point I had spent 2 or 3 weeks looking at everything, then I realised I could not find what I was looking for, and I was still walking. I was determined I would not fix my mountain bike, but try as I might, I could not see anything other than another ATB. I realised then that if I wanted what I was looking for, then I would have to roll my sleeves up and make it myself. There was something else I had figured out as well. To design a new bike, it takes a special type of engineer. They're much more complex than they first appear to be. You really need to be at the level where you could work at NASA or aircraft or motor racing. Cycles are very complex, more so than they first appear to be, yet you have little more to work with than a bent paperclip. Fortunately for me, I already tick all the right boxes, so I was going to tackle this as a project. And I felt good about it. I know a fella from NASA designed the BMX, and there was a fella called White that had worked on mountain bikes. I think he was involved with the Formula 1 team, maybe BMW and Mercedes. So I felt confident enough to take this one on. I'm going to change the story a little here before I look at the design stage, because something important happened. I was talking to people on Twitter. I doubt anyone was listening, as I never got any replies. And I ended up quitting Twitter. I didn't feel it was right for me. But anyway, I put out information about cycle tracks, then watch it go through the roof. Where the story came from is, I have a friend who worked for several years at the ROF, the Royal Ordnance Factory. All the munitions for the Second World War came from Chorley. The factory was a massive site, easily a mile long and nearly as wide, and mostly underground. My friend Steve was a shunter driver. He drove the small diesel trains that shunted the carriages around the site. He was not licensed to go on the main line. The factory was running down in the late 1980s. It's a housing development now called Buckshaw Village. He would spend days without having anything to do. I remember telling me once, he went to work one day and he says to his boss, "Right, what have you got for me today?" His boss replied, "Get the keys for the canteen and open it up, there's some painters coming." "Right, what shall I do after that?" He said, "When they've gone, lock it up again." That was a typical day's work for him, and as he was a keen radio am and had a CB set up, he would take it to work. I remember the name Yesu, a popular radio set, and CB radio was popular in the late 1980s before the internet came. He would bring pictures in the pub of different contacts he'd made. These were usually in Canada and North America, and the rigs they were using were a 30 or 50 foot aerial on top of the house, or a Winnebago type caravan with a 20 foot aerial at the top of a mountain. And they were shell shocked when they got a picture from him. That's because he had one of these, a Reliant Supervan. This is one I had in 1977, as I got sick of going to Bolton Tech on the bike in the rain. And you can use these on a motorcycle licence. These have a fiberglass body, so you wouldn't think this, with a 4 foot aerial, would give you outstanding radio transmission. The trick was to clip the radio aerial onto the railway track. Now the whole of Great Britain becomes one massive aerial, as all the railway tracks, like roads, are all joined together. Changes things a bit now, doesn't it? When you think of that lump of steel, millions of tons of high-grade manganese steel stuck on the roof of this little van. So my suggestion on Twitter of attaching cycle tracks to railways was instantly picked up on, because the building trade was on its knees and cycle tracks were a strong environmental issue. So the money came flooding in. Unfortunately, none of it came my way. Consider this though, nearly all the towns and cities are medieval towns, and they've been here for hundreds of years. And there isn't even room for the demands of traffic. So the notion of ripping up sections of the road for cycling lanes, it's a non-starter, isn't it? But the railways go everywhere, and it's state-owned land. Therefore, finding room for cycle lanes is much easier. And it's in demand, not just environmentally, but job creation as well. And that idea, it was copied by Germany, China, America, no doubt a whole host of other countries. That's the reason the Chorley Grand Prix opens the season. It's on the 15th of April, which will be the third or fourth time the event has been staged. If you look at these pictures of the town centre, the change has brought these cycle tracks, which is typical of what is going on all over the country and indeed the world. So this little bike I've been working on has already created hundreds of millions in work for people all over the world. If you look at the picture of the cycle track below, on the left you were just heading out of the town centre, as you see a decent enough cycle track system heading out of the town shown in the three pictures. This is typical of what people are trying to do, and you will find with new housing developments, supermarkets and industrial sites will follow suit. My working life was through the development of these sites, and cycle tracks were not a consideration. Everything was intended for the car. I'm going to leave the cycle tracks there but I will pick up on them again near the end, as I've got some more thoughts on the subject and construction methods. Before I move on, an interesting point on railway tracks. After the last war, there was quite a few broken rail tracks around Malaya and Burma. The natives would rob the steel off them and make knives and machetes, as it's high-grade manganese steel. When did you ever see a railway track wore out? Said, I bet the Gurkhas had some of that, it wouldn't surprise me. Design stage. Right, off we go with the design stage. The first decision I have to make might be the second biggest decision. But as it comes first, I have to deal with it to start off. That will set the tone for the rest of the bike. That decision is hardtail or softtail. If we translate that into English, that means rigid frame or full suspension frame. I've already decided not to use a full suspension frame, but rather than take my word for it, I will show you where I got up to with full suspension frames. Then you can make up your own mind. If we go back to this picture of the Coyote, it was one of the early alloy frames that dates to around 1993, that type of time period, and was very typical of frame design of the period. However long and tall this bike is, in reality, it is two pieces, a frame and a swinging arm that is held together by a shaft and a bush. The shaft will be hardened steel about 25 or 30mm in diameter inside a phosphor bronze bush. This means that the whole of the bike is only braced in the vertical plane. You can see in the line drawing in the central image where I have stripped everything else away. The arrows mark the spot where the two components join together. If we were now to lay that frame on two milk crates as shown and stand on that joint, you can see there is no support. The frame is not braced in that direction. But you might say, well, you're not going to be doing that, are you? Well, yes, you are. Every time you go round a corner and those two components are not fixed together there, they're on each side of a thin film of grease. So in reality, a film of grease is what is holding you up. In the nuclear industry, that will be what you call a shine path. The nuclear radiation could leak right through that joint, as it only has to pass through grease, which isn't very dense, is it? Try this for a thought. Every time you go around the corner, you pressurise both sides of that joint. More so if you cross a white line, which are everywhere. And while a white line doesn't mean much to the suspension on your car, it means a great deal to that frame joint. If you were to get on your hands and knees with a magnifying glass, you will see those white lines are about 3mm thick. They are very dense material, able to withstand the weight of a fully loaded wagon and not break up. That 3mm rise is like you standing on that joint and flexing your knees up and down. This causes the hardened steel shaft to cut through the grease and makes metal-to-metal contact with a phosphor bronze bush. This drawing shows the two contact points between the shaft in red and the bushes on the outer edge as the shaft wiggles about side to side, also up and down. I started to feel the effects of this wear after about a year of use. If I was going along a road and there was a rut in it, when the front wheel came out of the rut, the bike wasn't tracking true, and the back wheel would stay in the rut until the pressure on the joint increased. Then it would flick out, and it felt like there was a joint in the frame. The next sketch illustrates this. A cross section through the wheels shows the front tyre on the left and the back tyre on the right. They are leaning in towards each other as the frame tries to tear itself apart, as the pressure builds up and it tries to spring back together and correct itself. It is common to feel flexing on a cycle, but this type of flexing is new and feels unnatural. You soon sense there is something wrong. Once I realised I had something wrong, I crouched down on the left side of the bike, away from the gears on the other side, and got hold of the frame with my left hand and the swinging arm in my right hand. As I flexed the joint, the back end of the swinging arm had a movement of about half an inch. This was just over a year's worth of use, and by the time I had done 16 months of use, that movement had gone up to 2 inches and had thrown the chain off twice. I contacted the company with regard to getting a new shaft and bushes and was told that it was a discontinued model and no parts were available. So the only real option was to take the frame up to the canal and when no one was looking, toss it in and sneak back. Not something I was going to do, but I felt like it. If I had spent the £280 on a good hardtail frame, it would still be in service now, 23 years later, as all the parts that wear out, like wheels, gears, brakes, are replaceable. The next frame was another Softail. This proved to be too small. I got it from a big discount store, and they only made 16 and 18 inch, which proved to be a bit too small. When the gears wore out the second time, I gave it away. Although lightweight alloy, the frame was as heavy as 3 Coyote frames. The swinging arm bearings were bigger and more robust. It did feel okay. After 12 months, we were good enough to give away to a friend. But the bike was no lighter than the Specialized Hard Rock, so I bought one of those frames off eBay for £40 and rebuilt that. So I've been following the evolution of the full suspension frames since the early 1990s. So far, I've only seen fixes and not solutions. The next series of pictures shows you downhill frames, which some use on the road thinking it's a road bike, and this is the latest solution, but that is not the case. What we are looking at here is 3 different versions of the latest evolution in downhill bikes. They are all very similar and do the same job. The 2 on the left are in the £1,500 range, that goes up to £3,500. The one on the right is a cheaper version at £950, if that's cheap. I will zoom in on the centre one and show you more detail. The 4 red arrows I have put on show the bearings that the whole of the rear subframe swings on. With this being a downhill bike, it can be like a ski jump, where you come down a big hill picking up speed and then hit a bump, which launches you up into the air. Then you crash back down onto your back wheel. This can collapse the back end of a rigid frame. So all of that subframe will swivel up and compress the shock absorber, which is the black one at the front of the pivot. If you count them, there are 8 machine pivots in total, but even so it only carries the load in the vertical plane. If I was to disconnect one of those pivot points, I could pull that supporting arm outwards and snap it off. Also note with this machine the off-road tyres. An interesting point is how wafer thin the back cog is. No wonder they don't last long. I've seen people buy these and use them as a road bike. But if we were to put this frame on the milk crates and stand on this, then the problem has not gone away. It will be firmer, but this design is not a solution. In conclusion, with a beach cruiser, it's further flat and it says so on the tin. Then this is a downhill bike, it says so on the tin. To better understand the problem we are trying to deal with of bracing the swinging arm in the horizontal plane, let's have a look at some BSA motorcycles from the post-war period, and that will give you an understanding of the development history of the swinging fork rear suspension. Up until the Second World War, the motorcycles made by BSA were rigid frames, as shown on the top left image. This was a late 1949 one with telescopic front forks. We can dismiss this one as we are looking at full suspension frames. Next in 1950 came the plunger sprung frame, which is the top right. Then in 1954 the swinging arm sprung frames, shown below. We can have a look at those 2 in more detail. With this early suspension frame, 2 large plunger units were on the back wheel, one either side. They were leaning forward slightly to stop the rear chain tensioning as the wheel moved up. The wheel wasn't fixed in place solidly and floated with the springs, so they would have to be firm springs, or if you leaned over to the right to take a corner, the lower half of the spring, which might actually be 4 springs, 2 at the bottom and 2 at the top covering both sides of the bike. The lower section will compress, but the top section on the opposite side can expand, so the wheel can lean over the opposite way. This could throw the chain off. Not only that, they are big heavy springs and a new shaft and hub would have to be manufactured. Then the gears. You have already increased the width of the back end, then you're going to be putting 7 cogs on the outside of the frame, increasing the width more. It would be better having hub centre gears. Sturmey Archer makes some new ones, but just this 5-speed unit is under £95. Then a whole new system for the shaft needs to be made. This can be made as a fix, but not a solution. The reality is it's heavy, cumbersome, expensive, limited gearing with a harsh ride. probably costing in the region of £1,500. The plunger back end seems to be a non-starter at the moment. The next image is the swinging arm back end, which again is proving difficult for cycling. This is the later 1954 duplex double cradle sprung frame. This image better highlights just what the problem is. These frames became standard for motorcycles up until the mid-1980s. If you look at the swinging arm, which is called a sprung fork, it has two legs, same as a cycle. It has twin shock absorbers, which finished around the mid-1980s. But the big difference is, with being a double cradle frame, it has two sets of bearings, where I've positioned the red crosses. So now the back wheel sideways movement is triangulated on the plane of the rear section of the frame, and is braced in the horizontal plane. If you were to put this frame on the milk crates, you could jump up and down on this and it won't make any difference. The next development was monoshock suspension, which came about due to the advances in seals for the shock absorbers. This enabled you to lose one of the back shock absorbers and let one carry the load of two, and we can see why we cannot use that either. On the left, this modern Triumph has a monoshock unit, but you can't see it because it's tucked away behind the engine. On the right it is visible, you can see the springs in yellow. Interestingly, this bike uses a single side swinging arm. The wheel is mounted from one side. That does not help us though, because the frame still has the twin rail mounting points, and the wheel is wide enough to be robust with a single mounting. Next we can see the problem of mounting a twin point fix on a cycle frame. On the right hand side, the line drawing at the top, we have the frame section. Instead of welding the bearing support on there, if you put a tube on, you could put twin supports on and a shaft straight through them both. It would be like a motorcycle, braced in the horizontal plane. The thing is, that's not where the problem is. If we now look top left, the standard cycle wheelbase, and below I have copied the image and I've put two circles on it. The blue circle represents a maximum circle size, scribed by the outside edge of the pedal as it rotates. The green circle is the back of the heel of your foot. You put the ball of your foot on the pedal, so the back half overhangs, doesn't it? You then need 1.5 inches or 2 inch clearance before you can have the shaft carrying the bearings, then a 26-inch wheel. Look what that does to the wheelbase. As soon as you see that, it's another non-starter, isn't it? So that's it. 25 years on, lots of fixes, no viable solution. Personally, I would still buy a full suspension bike if I was in the position to do that. For that to happen, I would have to have a car, which I have not, and only use the bike for fun rides. Then a very good quality alloy one, which is about £475 with a discount. Then make sure I like the look of the bearing arrangement. Then buy 2 spare shafts and 2 sets of bearings to stick in a box under my bed in case it gets discontinued, and I would expect to get 10 or 15 years out of it. But now, as you understand more about the problem, we go back to what I said at the beginning. A full suspension frame is not compatible with a road cycle. It might be one day, but we are not there yet. Design stage layout. As we are now ready to start the design stage, I'm going to include some thoughts for the ones of you who might want to follow in my footsteps one day. In the mid-1990s, I called at a friend's for a cup of tea with him. The news came on the TV showing the Second Gulf War. An article was on about the Typhoon fighter jet. My friend said, "It's frigging useless, that. It's always breaking down. It's costing £9,000 an hour to keep it in the air." I had done some design work 10 years before in the mid-80s on the Eurofighter, which is what the Typhoon was called then. So I said to him, "It's gone into service a bit quick because of a war situation, but the design parameters dictate testing. There might be 500,000 parts on that. For man on the drawing boards to get everything perfect first time, it's nearly impossible. Things are made to be adjustable and tuned in as it all beds together. We've all seen that recently with the new aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth. The first thing it did was go for its sea trials. That is the problem I am facing. I don't need to get everything perfect first time. What I'm trying to do is get in the right ballpark. Take something difficult to predict accurately on a new design, like balance points. A strut can have its thickness increased to carry a greater load, or the angle of the strut can reduce or increase to shift the balance point, or the position along the linear axis can shift again to change the balance point. In testing, the best option will come out. Sod's law dictates the best position might not look the most attractive. That leads me on to the next point. Again, in the mid-1980s, I was working on the centre building at Sellafield nuclear plant. It's the size of 3 football fields. One day a fella involved with the outside cladding of the building came from the nuclear headquarters to see me. I was poking fun at him and said, "Cladding? What good do you bleeding lot do?" He must have heard it all before and jumped right down my throat saying, "You lot, bloody engineers. If you have a load of pipework you need to get to the other side of the building, you'll just knock an hole in the wall, take it up 2 floors and bring it back in. Every building would look like a chemical plant." Which is correct, I suppose. But a few years later I was going past the plant in a van coming back from Scotland. I showed my daughter the building I had been working on, and I was impressed how nice and sleek it looked compared to the other buildings, which looked like a blot on the landscape with no concern for the environment. From that you can conclude that the stylists are a very important part of the team, whereas with this cycle I'm primarily concerned with the engineering. But what if it looks ugly and you can't sell it? If when a person walks in a shop and sees it for the first time, they are intrigued enough to go across and look at it in detail, then you have won the first battle. After all, they're the ones with the money in their pockets. Next is accountants. That's a nasty word to some, but they too are an important part of the team. You can have all the fancy ideas you want, but if the numbers don't add up, it isn't going to happen, is it? The last point is planning. If you're not familiar with technical drawing, I would advise buy a clipboard and do some sketches to aid your thinking. If you were to build yourself a garden shed, take pictures of where it's going to fit in your garden, print it off and then sketch it out. From this you can make a materials list of the frame, go and buy that material, and as that is going on you can next plan the cladding, doors, windows, shelves, etc. There is nothing worse than buying material then realising it's wrong and it's scrap. There was a programme on TV in the 90s about building custom motorbikes, mostly Harleys. The main builder said he prefers to just get stuck in and develop it as it goes. The problem with this is, if you make a mistake, as you will at some point, because the parts have been made, it's an easier option to live with it. But then every other part you make has to fit with something that is wrong. If later you decide you really need to put that mistake right, then everything else has to change, which is too big, so you accept something that is wrong. I get lots of things wrong, but as I can see it in front of me, I can rub it out and start again. It's not a mistake until it goes into production. It's part of the creative process. So I'm ready to put a clean sheet on my drawing board, and to help stop me from going nuts, I'm going to put 2 pictures of bikes on it. The first is the Allterrain bike, which I suspect is the most popular cycle in the world, and a rally chopper, which is an enigma. It's a failed design that everybody loves. With the ATB, it must be doing something right, or it would not be so popular. If I can pinch all the good bits off that and discard what I don't like, then I should end up with something that is versatile and popular. With the chopper, what I need is the reasons why everyone loved it and where it went wrong. So my first instinct is a cycle that fits somewhere between those two, and that is what I would call my ballpark, or what the machine's intended purpose is. I've already called it the ATC, the All-Terrain Cruiser, so I already know what I'm looking for. Right, I've got 2 images of what I want to see, and I will interrogate them separately and make a list of all the positive and negatives I can find. The next issue is something that has been nagging away at me for a few years, as when I finish off in the gym, I like to do half an hour on the exercise bikes, as this is very good for losing fat of your hips, thighs, midsection, which gets harder to lose as you get older. I'm going to show you a photo of the machines in the gym for an interesting discussion. In the gym I'm going in now, There were 8 cycling machines. The first 3 machines in this picture are cycling. After that, they're running machines. I prefer running on the roads. The first 2 in the photo are the upright, like the ATB. The last one is the more sat-down type. Although the rally chopper looks similar, it's not. That has got a fault in it, which we will look at later. Before I signed up at this gym, I did 2.5 years at the sports centre. They had 15 cycling machines, but only 3 were the sat-down type. I remember listening to the radio once and a doctor said for men, especially the prostate region, the worst thing that you can do is to cycle. Give it up right away. Many times in the summer I would go to the sports centre twice, once at 7:30 a.m. and again in the evenings at 6 p.m. With always running and cycling every day. It's usual to get spots around the groin area as you sweat there, but one day I started feeling uncomfortable sat on the upright cycle, and I got soreness on the right side of my groin. Over the next few days it got worse, and after poking about a bit I felt a lump, which felt like the size of a large pea, deep inside the groin where the leg joins. I left cycling for a couple of days, then swapped to the sat-down cycle, which I had not bothered with much as I preferred the TV screens behind the upright cycle. Over the next 2 weeks the lump went down and back to normal. So it was the ride of the upright cycle position that caused it. Although I cycle every day as I have no other transport, when I go to a gym I only use the sat-down type of machines. I've posted this picture again so you can keep scrolling back up to it as we are talking. At the top the seat is uncomfortable. Would you sit on that at home to watch TV? Not for very long, I expect. The seat is too high. You can't get on the bike unless it's moving. And it lacks safety. You cannot touch the floor unless you get off it. The seat is in the wrong position to the pedals. If you went in a gym and the weights machine required you to sit down and push down with your legs, you would say it's faulty. You can only put small weights on, otherwise you just stand up. I expect that ended cycles until gears were developed for them to enable you to go up hills. The relationship between the seat position and the handlebars is incorrect. If you look at my line of vision, I am looking at the floor in the centre of the front wheel. I have now got to tilt my head up at 45 degrees to look forward. Again, if you watch TV at home in that position, how long would you put up with that? Too much weight is placed on the wrists, which become noticeable with bigger distances. From a positive point, the cycle is quite compact and minimalistic, making it lightweight, and the distance required between the seat and pedals for power generation can be fitted into this layout. The gears and brakes are easily accessible. With the next one, the chopper, where do we start? If you look at the relationship between the pedals where you would sit above that and the handlebars, it's only suitable for a kid. If you were taller and sat at the back of the seat, you couldn't reach the handlebars. The gear lever, although looking cool, it's in the wrong position. You wouldn't expect nowadays to tell your kids, take your hand off the handlebars, look down rather than forward, reach down, pushing your shoulder forward, change gear, look up, put your hand back on the handlebars, and do all that while staying in a straight line. Front wheel is too small and only stable on the flat, and there's little rake on the forks. The frame was unbalanced with anything other than a small child. Positive points were, it was massive on style in 1972, there was nothing like it. The 3 speeds were adequate for most situations. It had a suspension seat and could carry a passenger. It had chrome mudguards and red stripes on the wheels. This picture shows you when the Mark II model came out. I presume it was a Mark I that I had. When that happens, it tells you there was something wrong with the first model. If you look at the back struts on the left image, the weight is carried beyond the wheel centre. This gives you a bending moment around the rear axle. That is what made it unstable. On the right, the Mark II, the position of the strut was changed to preload the front of the axle, and the seat post was leaned over to match. It didn't prove to be successful, as when you raise the seat, it slides backwards, cancelling out some of the gains, and it died off after that. Which was a pity, because like the BMX, it generated its own little world, and that is something I would like to capture. A cycle people can come to love and be passionate about, in the same way that happens with cars and motorcycles. What you can see here is I have made a line drawing of the ATB in black and white. I've done this as a visual aid. What that means is a way of looking under the skin and trying to figure out what is really going on. As a way of explaining, consider this. If I was to put a picture in front of you with two Minis on it, not the new BMW Mini, the old British Leyland Austin Mini. On the left, the early mid-60s version. On the right, the last one, I think it was 1986. If it was a colour picture, you would quickly identify the later one. The early colours were very drab. They looked like Second World War colours. The later one has much brighter metallic paint, wider alloy wheels, chrome trims, tinted windows, a nice chrome aerial, maybe a screen visor. It would be immediately obvious. If the picture was black and white, you would identify them as just two Minis. With a lack of information, your vision and brain hunts for what is really going on. It's one of the reasons people still like black and white photography. I have worked on some steel frame buildings, what you call a portal frame building. Big supermarkets are made like that now. The bricks are put round the outside as a cladding or a skin to make it look pretty for your benefit. The bricks carry no weight, they're what you call not load bearing. It's a similar thing I am looking at. Will this building stand up and not interested in the colour of the bricks? Will this cycle work? I can paint it any colour I want after if it works. Now with the two men added in the seating positions, I have some thinking to do. With this drawing I'm having a look at some wheel sizes. The standard is 26 inch. There is 24 inch for teenagers. The BMX is 20 inch. I dismiss that as too small, but there is an oversized BMX for teenagers that is 22 inches. I will be scheming with 26, 24 and 22 and play about with combinations and see what I like myself rather than follow what others say I should or should not do. One rule I like the sound of is to stay within the overall length of the large specialised frame as it's nimble on the roads, yet it still gives me room to play with for the lower and longer seating position. What you can see me doing here is using the frame and wheelbase as a background template to check out my ideas and thinking. This helps me to stay in check and stops me running away with myself, as the template works as a guideline for the parameters that I have set. If it works out that I have to exceed that wheelbase and overall length, then it will be because I have exhausted all possibilities and have no other alternative. Although the background template is the ATB, the man will be the new seated version in all new sketches, and I will try and work the old seating position out of my thinking. I like that last layout, so I started working on it and I did this sketch. There is a gap of 4 years from the first work I did and what I am doing now. I was involved with something else which overran me. There is a saying, there is always a better way. Sometimes you run into a brick wall, like the suspension frame, but more often the more time you have to think can produce better design. My initial attempts were to capture as much of the rally chopper, with it being so popular, but the overly small front wheel was part of its downfall. The next picture explains wheels for you. This next picture shows you 4 different bikes. The top 2 are me sat on the bikes in the past. Top left is a Triumph from around 1978. You will notice both wheels are the same size, 19 inch, which was common for a road bike. Top right is a Suzuki from the mid-1980s. Again, both wheels are the same size, but smaller, 17 or 18 inches. Bottom right is a Ducati road bike. This has a smaller front wheel, has less gyroscopic force to overcome when cornering. The quicker you will go round the corner and give you a faster lap time. Bottom left is a Triumph Tiger Adventure Trail. This is a semi-off-road capability for crossing Africa or Australia. You will notice that this has a bigger front wheel. It might be 21 inch front and 18 or 19 inch rear. If you was going to go over rough or uneven ground, a small wheel will drop quicker into a dip, then flick up on the other side. The bigger wheel will smooth it out. Similarly, if you crest a small hill or a lump, the small wheel will drop over the top quicker, where a bigger wheel will ride it out longer, giving a gentler descent. Although the chopper front wheel was part of its styling features, I am making an all-terrain cruiser. that will be road, cycle track and off-road capability. So I think I can let the smaller front wheel go and live with what I have got. If you want more of an off-road ability, then buy an ATB or an MTB. Also notice the top two bikes have twin shock absorbers. This next sketch I'm working opposite and adding a bright colour. I'm not doing this to aid my decision making, but what it will do will show how my decisions affect the styling process, which is important in its own way. With this you can see the original ATB rear strut and its new position as I ponder balance points. At the moment I like how this is progressing. I will make up a sketch about balance points so you can see what I'm trying to figure out and the different options I have to play with. Also notice with this tubing, the front down tube is circular rather than oval. I changed this later. With this sketch I am feeling quite pleased with myself because I've got a 6-foot man, looks to be sitting comfortably in a large ATC frame. As a matter of proportions that's good because a small kid scaled down would look the same. Overly large man with an extra large frame would look the same. There is a tipping point to consider which differs from a balance point. If you look at the body mass, we are not beyond the back axle that gave the bending moment on the chopper, causing its instability problems. At this point I feel I have done the hard work and it should be a case of tweaking things as I go along. I'm making a change here by reducing the leverage on the support strut. It will carry the load the same. I want provisions to fit the rear suspension and a back luggage rack. That was why I ran the tube into the end, but I will cut a box section down or use a folded plate. This sketch shows the ATB rear strut with the best guess of its new position. I noticed a conflict from a styling point with converging diagonals between that strut and the front lower frame tube. So I thought I'd better put that one right with a bit of feng shui or harmony. It will cost a little more and people won't notice it, but it helps things to look good. This is what we have to do, make your own mind up if it's worth it. At the top, the standard bottom bracket arrangement with the chain wheel axle fits in. The front down tube is on the right. If we change the angle to match the rear strut, it leaves a gap and slightly weakens the stiffness of the crank support. Under heavy load going up a steep hill, you might get left to right distortion as you pedal and get cracks on the welds. Maybe, maybe not. An off-cut of tubing welded in would stiffen this area. As no one will see it behind the chain wheel, you could maybe get away with it, but I would recommend not to do that. Even though I'm trying to save weight, it will cost slightly more and no one will notice a final result. But if you leave converging diagonals on the frame that is on show, then the overall look of the machine will not look as slick or sharp, but few would realise why. I made a mistake on this one. The top image I was thinking more about the ATB leg length and lifted the seat up and missed the radius of the support strut. I put that right, then thought the front down tube needed to swap to oval rather than round tube. I was trying to save weight, but thinking about it, there might be a force acting that is not on the ATB. I will draw it out and see if we can figure it out between us. In the sketch below, we can see the difference with the modified front down tube position. Although from an engineering perspective it makes no difference and costs little more in time and materials, from a stylish point it will make life easier. To picture that, think about a frame colour like white or blue, where you have a different colour stripe, say yellow or orange, that contrasted with the overall paint scheme. If that stripe ran the length of those two components, then the converging diagonal will jump right out at you. In circumstances like that, the effect would be exaggerated. I was right to question my thinking. Rather than delete the previous statement, I will leave it in. The next sketch shows you from an engineering point it does make a difference, and increasing the depth of that tube was a better option for increased stiffness. On the left I have put the loading points. On the top two arrows is the overall weight on the wheelbase, which might be 65-35 base to the rear. The frame is well triangulated at the rear, so it should be rigid enough. The loading might be around 60-40. On the right I have drawn some secondary triangles as something was playing on my mind. The rear triangle on the frame, the lower horizontal section, stops the seat post from pushing forward as the load tries to expand that triangle. The red arrow shows the direction the seat post is trying to move in. There is another secondary triangle between the crankshaft and the front wheel. The horizontal section is missing, but that triangle cannot expand because the fork tubing extends into the headstock and forms another secondary triangle between the headstock and the strut on the top tubing. But that top tubing has another load, which is a bending moment caused by the seat extending outwards from its usual position. This is something new. So the bottom tubing has a compression force pushing it forward, left to right, and it wants to move upwards as well. The two red arrows show the position those tube wants to move into. Also, the top tubing wants to move right to left and upwards. That means swapping from circular to oval tubing increases the depth and stiffness in the vertical plane, which is just what you want to counter those forces. After that little episode, it reminded me of something that happened many years ago. When I first moved into the drawing office, I took a drawing for checking. The person doing it was one of the big bosses, really bad-tempered. It would make you sweat just standing next to him. He ended up giving me earache for leaving stuff on my drawing. He said, "Never leave anything off your drawing. The checkers won't spot it then. You can put egg and chips on your drawing. The checkers will say, 'What's this?' It shouldn't say egg and chips. But if you don't put it on, it won't spot it, will it?" That was made me think about something else. My next sketch was to ponder balance points, and due to gyroscopic effects, it made me think about a resonance, which is something very destructive in engineering that you do not want. I think we'd better have a look at that as well. Trying to figure out balance points is not easy on the ATB. The green line is a guess. Your centre of gravity is 2 inches below the navel as the leg weight is half of the body. But the upper body is leaning over, which lowers it. But the legs, not fully outstretched, are rising alternately. That would rise it back up. The weight is not far off straight down, and weight distribution might be around 60-40 on the rear wheel. On the ATC, the body weight is further back, which is unbalancing, but the load point is inboard. Also, there is a gyroscopic effect from the lower legs that is more noticeable than on the ATB. The legs are heavy from the knee down. They're all bone and muscle. There is also kinetic energy passing through them. As you know, a kick has a heavier impact than a leg resting on you. And all that effect is inboard of the tipping point, which will cancel some of it out. Something else that is on my mind is a resonance, which is a very destructive force. There are stories of bridges collapsing just by soldiers marching over them in step. It sounds strange, but a high frequency vibration sets up which multiplies and becomes very destructive. There is a theory that the Bible story, the Wall of Jericho, if true, was likely to be a resonance. I can tell you a story I know that is true. A friend of mine who is a nuclear engineer was working at the headquarters in Cheshire. A group of them will go for a walk at dinner time. He gets out of the office, and they would go off the side, do a loop across a motorway bridge, and there was usually 5 of them. The bridge was a single track for farm vehicles. One day they decided to walk in step 5 deep across the bridge in a march. He said by the halfway point all of them could feel a sway working on the bridge, and that's just 5 men wearing shoes. I know him well and I've no reason to doubt him. On this bike, the ATC, the seat is sat on an outrigger, something I have not seen before. As you pedal left, right, you will get flexing up and down in the elastic range of that material. That will make a frequency, like a tuning fork. If you look at the frame design where I've put the arrows, that is a loop. If you throw a stone in water, you get ripples that die away slowly. Musical instruments do a similar thing. A piano uses dense steel to sustain a note. So as the frequency circles that loop until it dies away, more frequencies are continually being added as you pedal. That is a resonance that builds up, and it's not building up in a bridge, it's building up in a highly stressed piece of dense carbon steel, just like a piano sustain. I will do you a drawing of dense carbon steel. As Yoda would say, think about this, will I? A view of atomic structures showing low carbon steel on the left with the body centre qubit structure, 9 atoms. On the right, a face centre qubit structure, 15 atoms, for high carbon steel which is denser. This helps to prevent slip planes on the atomic ladder. Underneath a section of the atomic ladder. As the loading on the structure increases, the material will pass into the elastic deformation range. If that loading reduces, it will spring back to the original shape. If the loading passes into the plasticine deformation range, the resistance of the tension between the atoms will be broken. A slip at the molecular level will occur, causing a shift along the atomic ladder, called a slip plane. If the loading now reduces, the material has undergone plastic deformation and will remain in its new position, what we call bent. By adding carbon to the steel, it fills up the interstices between the molecules, with carbon being smaller, and it takes a bigger load to cause a slip along the molecular plane. When you are working with a cycle, you want a high carbon steel that is also malleable and can flex rather than a tool steel that is hard and brittle. You also want to adopt aircraft type thinking and reduce the weight as much as you can, because there is no engine. You have to pedal this everywhere you go. Yet a situation like this might occur. You now have 2 people in front of you, both 5 feet 9 inches tall, and use the same size frame bought from a shop. One is a girl who uses a bike for summer rides along the seafront. She weighs 8.5 stone, wearing shorts and a t-shirt. The other is a boy who uses his bike for going to work in winter, down a big hill that bends to the right and has a bumpy surface. He weighs 16 stone, carrying saddlebags, winter gear, lights, in cold wintry conditions. The frame has to provide structural strength for that at all times, yet be lightweight and cheap. It's easy to see how stress can build up in these frames. With this sketch, we can look at an adjustment in the balance point using the struts on the frame geometry. This next sketch shows the different effects of moving the rear struts. In the top left image is the standard position. The top right image, the angle of the strut has reduced, although that would move the loading point on the seat strut inwards and down. The loading point on the rear axle is the same, and the problem with the converging diagonals has come back. In the bottom right image, the angle of the strut has remained the same, but the strut has now moved inboard of the axle, bringing the loading on the seat strut further forward and lower than the previous modification. And it does not conflict and give converging diagonals. The downside of that is the increase in leverage on the seat mounting, and the strut down tube, although still running parallel, is less favourable. The loading on the rear axle has also moved inwards. If things worked out, which at the moment we're not 100% certain of, my first layout would be the best option. There is another option: return the front down tube to its original position, then line the rear strut up to match that. Head angle. Steering head angle and preferred choice of this. The bike on the left is the one that I borrowed off a friend. When I rode it for the first time, it felt strange, as though I'd run into a wall and knocked the steering head angle backwards. The more I looked at this bike, the stranger it got. I presumed it was another all-terrain bike, as that's what it first looked like. It has slightly raised handlebars. The seat was well padded, with 2 springs at the back. The seat had got slashed outside a sports centre, so I changed that for the one shown. There was a shock-absorbing seat post. The wheels are 700mm diameter, not 26 inches that I was used to. To convert 26 inches into millimetres, times it by 25.4, and that equals 660.4. The tyres were road tyres, same as mudguards. It came with a back rack and a side stand. Then it says on the frame, trekking geometry. That means the steering head angle is set very steep for tight turns, as you might find on the hills or in the woods. It's the same on a trials motorbike or a BMX bike, where the kids are spinning round in obstacles. Didn't seem to make much sense to me. A racing motorcycle has that type of geometry for corners, but a cruising motorcycle has slightly less angle to increase the wheelbase for better straight line stability. If you look at my bike, which is an Allterrain bike, but made from the early mountain bike, as I bought that frame off eBay for £40, they were also used for downhill, which works fine with the straight line stability, and those frames seem nimble enough for road use. Having a rear seating position might work against the combination of a tight steering head angle, as it works better for me as I want to put on the bike 180mm pedal cranks rather than the standard 170mm cranks. As I'm fighting for room, and the extra wheelbase with the softer fork angle gives that little bit more room to play with. Brakes. Caliper, cantilever, V, mechanical disc, hydraulic disc. What is going on? Let's pick through them and see what we can figure out. Top left is the caliper brake, then the cantilever, V, mechanical disc, hydraulic disc. First thing is, why so many? The first setup was the caliper, or rim brakes as some call them, also side pull brakes. Fairly simple setup and performed quite well. Only really accepted narrow wheels, as it's difficult to get the tyre out without dismantling the brake. When the NTB came out, the cantilever brake was introduced. It gave a more direct braking power and much needed clearance for mud. Although superseded by the V-brake, it's still popular with cyclocross. I presume it's because of mud clearance that you got with it. The V-brake came out next and became standard on the mountain bike and all-terrain bike. The length of the brake arms was the telling factor. These started off at 100mm, then moved up to 110. On my ATB I have a front brake with special 125mm long arms. And with wide dirt track tyres on a dry road, I can stand it on its nose with 2-finger braking. That's what you call stopping power. Next came the mechanical discs. I was talking to my brother when he bought some of the early ones in the mid-1990s. I asked if they were any good. His reply was, they're okay. He wasn't over-enthusiastic about them. But the big difference was, as I mentioned, he goes on the Commonwealth cycling track, and the pathways and the hills around Remington is loose sandstone gravel. And especially in winter, when you're coming down off the hills, that is like sandpaper that you're grinding into your wheel rims with your brake pads. He was wearing out 2 sets of rims a year. With good quality rims, that's £200 a year. As the discs are much higher up, this problem stops, doesn't it? They suffer other problems though. There is not the braking surface area that you have on the wheel rims, so the mechanical pressure wasn't really sufficient. That brought about the swap, which proved to be unsuccessful, to hydraulic brakes. These provide more power at a cost financially and in weight and complexity. When the V-brake came out, it pushed the cantilever brake out of general use. But you can see yourself that's not happened with a disc brake. When that happens, it usually tells me there is something wrong. So let's have a look at them in more detail and see what we can figure out between us. The first thing we'll do is have a look at the position of the disc caliper, because I don't like it. I'm known for being awkward. In the picture we have mechanical disc and a race-derived motorcycle with twin hydraulic discs, and both have positioned the brake caliper behind the fork stanchion. Why would they do that? The cycle is pointing right to left, so in this image the wheel is rotating anti-clockwise. As the wheel goes through the grime and grit, it throws it onto the caliper and the back of the fork leg, where it runs down into the caliper and clogs it up and greatly increases the wear rates of the rotor and brake pads. So why would they do that? When motorcycles first put disc brakes on them in the early 70s, they put the caliper in front of the fork stanchions. So why swap it to the back? The usual culprits, racing teams. As I mentioned, front wheels reduced in size to speed up cornering. As you lean into a corner, you have to brake the rotational gyroscopic effect, then the wheel flops over. When you're coming out of a corner, you do the same, but you have to lift the bike up. So if you position your caliper behind the fork stanchion, as you turn the wheel to lift yourself up, the weight of the twin calipers at the back of the stanchions will swing the other way and help to lift you up. So all things being equal, you will corner faster with the caliper at the back of the fork than at the front. If you look at the bigger picture, what is happening is, if two motorcycles do 190 miles an hour across the finish line, 1/8 of a second apart, what that represents is 1 mile is 1,760 yards. 190 miles an hour is 334,400 yards. If you divide that by 60, it's 5,573 yards per minute. Divide by 60 again, it's 92.8 yards per second. Divide by 8 is 11.6 yards per eighth of a second. To put it in a visual scale, times by 3, and that equals 34.83 feet. A double-decker bus is usually 36 feet, so it's a hair's breadth at 190 miles an hour. But crucially, the salesmen have a ball, because when old Mug Punter walks into a shop, it says everywhere, Yamaha first, Honda first. The salesmen have it easy. They will tell you the reason they always win is because it's a better, more advanced, more efficient design. Then you end up with a situation in the picture with twin massive disc brakes at the back of the stanchions on the road where the legal limit is 70 miles an hour. The cycle engineers think you must know what you're talking about, so they go and copy you. If I were to start from scratch, I will put the caliper at the front of the fork stanchion and decrease the wear rates and reduce the maintenance of the rotor, the brake pads and the caliper. But there will be two problems that will come with that. One is accountants. You could envisage them scratching their head and saying, why do I have to fund the development costs of making a new caliper when I can buy one off the shelf? Fair enough. Second point is, people would say, what planet do these designers come from? First off, they say they want the caliper at the front. Then they say they want it at the back. Now they want them at the front again. Real nut jobs, them men. Back to the hydraulic brake. They have more pistons in them, 2 or 3 either side, which increases the power, and on long downhill sections, the liquid can help drag some of the heat out of the system. I was just looking at an advert for Shimano R785 STI. Doesn't say if that's a full set of components, but that's £625. Ouch. So we've got there, have we? We spent big money on a top set of hydraulic brakes. Well, no, not quite. It doesn't work like that. When you squeeze your V-brake onto your wheel rim, you get a solid transfer of the energy from the brake unit bolted onto the fork stanchion. The brake block squeezes both sides of a good quality rim. Then the energy transfer goes into the tyre, then onto the road. With the disc brake, the caliper is bolted onto the fork stanchions. The brake pads flow under pressure onto the rotor, which is bolted onto the wheel centre. Then the spokes transfer the energy onto the wheel. Grab a handful of spokes and squeeze, see what happens. They flex very easily. That's because the bits of wire, and wire comes in gauges called SWG, standard wire gauge. The bigger the number, the thinner the wire. So 18 SWG is thinner than 14 SWG, which is thinner than 12 SWG. On my bike, there's 36 spokes. I was looking at a race bike and it had 28 spokes, which looked thinner diameter, and it had hydraulic brakes on. Some wheels go down to 24 spokes. I can see myself flying along on that, slam the front brake on, which in them circumstances carry 90% of the braking force, only to see the wheel blow up. At this point, I don't know about you, but I've had enough. I'm giving up. Instead, I will draw out a brake booster I devised several years ago for drum brakes, and I will fit it onto a nice, neat little twin leading shoe drum brake for cycles. Then you can throw the hydraulic brakes in the bin. This is the Honda Cub. This is by far the most popular bike in the world. It started off as 50cc, then they made a 70cc and a 90cc. This is a C90 and it's a custom. First time I've seen one of these customised. I don't know about you, but I think it looks neat. If it's so popular, why have they not put a disc brake on it? With this drum brake, that could stop this with 2 people on at 70 miles an hour. No problem at all. Don't go thinking the drum brake is the pure relation of brakes. Far from that. There's a big braking area that is not affected by weather conditions. Disc brakes are cheaper to produce, and if you want to win a race, discs are better because you will need to dissipate an unusually large amount of heat, stopping from 190 miles an hour. And having twin used discs stuck out in the fresh air, that will do nicely, won't it? That Triumph I showed you, the later version of the BSA variant of that, used the last twin lead and shoe drum brake, and it easily matched the twin disc setup. And that was a heavy bike, 470 pounds dry weight. So I don't think we will have any problems stopping a cycle. Also, you can get away without cast wheels, as the spokes are shorter and therefore stiffer. This image shows you the front view of the typical V-brake assembly. The cable comes into the right fork leg brake arm cable holder. Then the inner cable is captive with a screw in the left brake arm. What we are going to do to make a brake booster is copy this, but turn it around and fit it onto the back of the fork leg. I devised it several years ago for boosting the power of drum brakes, but you can make one at home for the mechanical discs. You won't be able to fit it on suspension forks due to the welding destroying the internal machine surface, but a manufacturer could make one. Here is a list of parts that you will need. First I will explain the difference between shoulder bolts and high tensile set screws. At the top left we have a shoulder bolt and a high tensile steel set screw, HTSS for short. The shoulder bolt carries the load in shear. In the sketch on the left, the bolts are sized by length, so the shoulder extends for the length of the hole. A washer and a nut are put on, and when tightened, the arrows show the pressure points of the joint. Although the bolt is tightened sufficiently, the shear force rests on the shoulders of the bolt. With a high tensile steel set screw, the joint works differently. The thread extends to the bottom of the bolt and the nut is tightened to a specific high torque value. The arrows now show the joint is held by friction between the two plates, and it's the friction force that overrides the shear force. So we now need to buy off the internet 2 high tensile steel set screws. If you look at the brake block I stripped down, the shaft coming out is what we're looking for. You can go a little bit bigger in diameter as the hole in the brake arm can be increased. If you now screw 3 nuts down to the bottom, you can grip that in a vise and grind off the remaining thread shown in the bottom picture. You then need access to an acetylene or propane torch. One of your friends at a small garage might help. Heat the end up and knock it down into a spade end. Once that is done, grab the spade end in the vise, warm the top of the spade end up where it joins the shaft, and knock it over about 10 or 15 degrees. You can now back off the 3 nuts and saw off the end of the set screw, so you can undo the nuts from the other end. All you need to do now is drill and countersink the spade end and put a saw cut in it. I will move up to 2mm diameter for the bottom cable. Standard is 1.5mm, but when you get the cable made up, which the internet will provide, specify a 2mm cable. This shows the assembled item fitted onto the rear of the forks. You will need to saw off the brake mount from the right leg, turn it around and weld it onto the rear of the left leg. I would move it in further as the lever won't swing in like it does when holding a brake shoe. Shown is the on position. It will open leftwards slightly as you release the lever. On the left shows the on-off positions. I would expect the added mechanical force now to increase somewhere between 4:1 and 10:1. It all depends on the length of the brake arms that you choose. On the right, all you need to do is weld a bent plate with a hole in it and a nut welded underneath, so the captive nut can lock down the end of the cable. A lot of force can be applied from the V-brake setup. Also notice the tread pattern of my dirt track tyres. If you look at that brake arm, it's actually a crowbar now, isn't it? What I'm showing here is the difference between a single leading shoe brake setup and a twin leading shoe. Bottom left is a single leader in the closed position. Above is the open position. As you can see, the contact point is not the full width of the shoe. On the right, the twin leading shoe nearly doubles the stopping power, with not much increase in parts and cost. The downside on motorcycles was the increased brake pressure needed with the hand lever. Pondering over this problem led me to devise the brake booster. A large surface area is covered with drum brakes, and they are isolated from bad weather conditions and require little servicing. This is a picture of a Honda from the early 70s that I managed to get while I was out cycling. As you can see, the disc brake calipers were positioned in front of the stanchions. Also notice 19-inch wheels. Motorcycles are faster now than they was when I was growing up, but the fly in the ointment is that the speed limit is still 70 miles an hour. So much for progress. I'm making a little interruption before I draw out the front brake detail, as something that's been playing on my mind for a while. I've been thinking that the frame profile was looking a little flat, which makes it look old-fashioned. When the MTB first came out, the frame tubing was smaller diameter and the crossbar was horizontal, which followed styles of the period. Oversized tubing was introduced, which became standard. Then the sloping crossbar came in. If you look at older bikes now, they look flat and with very narrow tubing. This nowadays makes an old-fashioned look. So playing about with this, I made this layout. Top left is the standard that I had. On the right, I raised the headstock and lowered the handlebars to suit. Underneath, I kept the standard headstock, but put more of a radius in the crossbar, which now looks okay. I won't finalise the final layout until I've sorted out the seat position. This brings up the point I made at the beginning about not getting stuck in and making parts. If I had done that, I would now be considering scrapping the frame, the biggest item, which wouldn't go down very well, would it? Above we have the detail of the twin leading shoe front brake. On the left, the view of the brake plate. That will be an aluminium casting. This shows the front earth scoop and brake arm. On the right, a chrome louvered disc. On a cycle you could get away with 4 holes in the casting, but this chrome disc copied off a BSA looks particularly nice. So I'll give it a bit of bling, why not? Underneath, the red arrows show the airflow direction as the air drags the heat build-up out of the brake drum. This presents brake fade under heavy load situations. On the left, a schematic of how the brake assembly would look built into a wheel. Personally, I would make the brake a little on the narrow side and compensate with a bigger diameter. This would shorten the length of the spokes and toughen up the wheel. I think it would also make the front end of the bike look more purposeful, combined with the chrome louvered disc on the other side. So we can add a bit of the cosmic effect of the rally chopper into the mix. Handlebars. The handlebars we are looking for are called Western pullbacks. The picture shows my daughter when she would listen to me and a Honda CX Custom. This seating position is typical of nearly all the custom bikes you will see. Your back is up straight, all the weight is on the backside. If you look at the hands, they just sit flat on the handlebar grips. There is no weight on the wrists, as the upper body is not leaning forwards. The handlebar grips are turned back around 45 degrees. This makes a very comfortable driving position. You could ride across America sat like this. If you were to add a set of pedals to this layout, that is basically what we have adapted to the cycle, and when you ride these bikes, the balance factor seems nice enough for what you're doing. I produced a sketch while I was doodling. I swung the front down tube back to its original position, then lined the rear strut up to match it. This will stop the converging diagonals problem occurring and move the loading point further inboard of the rear axle. It's one more variant that we could have in the quest for the perfect layout. One of those situations, this one, where testing will produce the winner. An important decision I made early on was to make a front handlebar screen available as an item on this cycle. There's 2 good reasons for that. First reason was wind, which is a big issue as far as cycling goes. You don't notice it that much in a car as the engine carries the load, but when you're cycling it can be a crushing factor, especially with this driving position being bolt upright. Your upper body will act like a sail in the wind. This brings about the second point. This wind effect could have a destabilising effect with us having a tipping point due to the seat being positioned on an outrigger. What this can do is take the weight off the front wheel. The front screen can give us some racing type aerodynamics because for every action there is an opposite and equal reaction. So as the wind pressure is deflected up and over the body, the opposite direction would be for the downward force to preload the front wheel. What that means is not only do we have the wind deflected away from the upper body, creating the tipping effect, we now have a downward force pushing the front wheel back onto the road surface. As the wind force increases, the downward force will also increase, creating stability on the front end of the bike. As cycling is a growth area and cycle tracks are slowly spreading out, you might find more people are choosing to cycle to work, and in winter conditions that screen can be something nice to hide behind. I've been forced to cycle to work in bad weather conditions. I know what it's like. I decided also that cycle lights were well overdue for a major upgrade, and as there is a very simple and effective way of doing this, we might as well upgrade those while we're at it. There's some cruiser bars here that I bought for my ATV. They were okay, but the ride height felt very high with the seat position being set for maximum power. Also, the extra loading on your backside with being sat upright was noticeable on the seat I had. If you fancy anything like this, try Triton Cycles. I think it's in Cornwall. The hand positions were not far enough back, as these are cycling cruiser bars, not motorcycle western pullbacks. It did go some way though to slowing me down while I'm riding on the pavement and helped me to decide that I was onto a good thing with the ATC. These handlebars are a bit more like it, but these are wide with being for large cruising bikes. You can get the idea of how much of a pullback you're looking for and the relationship between the seat height and the handlebar grip. Experimentation will provide the final answer because how much the body moves while cycling. Also notice the screen on the right image and the protection it gives. I'm just going to throw something different in here because I've spotted something while I was out jogging. Some alterations on the footpath here to make a cycling track to negotiate an obstacle. This is a recent development in 2018. If we start at the top left image, we're on the busy A6, a trunk road, approaching a bend with the canal bridges. After that there is a fork in the road. You can see the pavement on the left has been lowered to invite you onto it, and still visible is a cycling symbol and what's left of the line markers. Next image, as this is a bend in a fast road, the canal bridge is reinforced with crash barriers. Another cycling symbol is visible where you would have been originally. Now you can be on the footpath on the left side of the crash bar. Next image, as you are ready to exit the bridge, you can see the fork in the road coming up. On the left there is a car garage. Occasionally you will see someone stood there, but mostly this section of the pavement is empty as we are heading out of town. I jog along here regularly, and you might see the odd jogger like me or someone taking his dog down to the canal, but mostly the pavement is empty. Bottom left, the main traffic flow goes to the right along the A6 trunk road heading to Manchester. The branch road heads towards Rivington, which is a popular choice for the cyclists. The Chorley Grand Prix will head up there. You can see the footpath in the front of the garage has been lowered as well. Next image is a close-up of the pavement where it has been lowered. I have not seen this method before. It's 9 sections with raised spots. Looks like it's purposely for cycles. The last image is looking back towards where the bridge is in the distance on the left. You can see the cycle lane on the road where you would have previously been, but now you are still on the pavement. This picture was taken on Easter Sunday when you might expect people to be going out for a walk, yet look how empty the pavement is. It's fair to say car drivers don't want cyclists on the roads. You can now negotiate a dangerous bend and a fork in the busy road without being in harm's way. As I said, it's a recent development, so it shows you there is still an ongoing development programme for cycle tracks, and what I would suggest for you is to look at your own locations, as you know your area better than anyone else, and see if there are any improvements that could be done. If so, take some pictures and write a report, pass it round to your friends and submit it to your local council. If you can improve the environment from a safety point, you will create some work for civil engineering at your council area, and as you can see, money is available for it. Let's have a look at some lights as there is room for a major upgrade. I grew up with motorcycles made mostly in the 1960s and 70s. Once the Japanese invasion was underway in the 1970s, you realised how poor the lighting was that you was used to. Originally 6 volts, then boosted to 12 volts when the alternators were fitted instead of a dynamo. But crucially, the lenses or instrument design was not changed, just a brighter bulb added. With the Japanese bikes, it was like looking at a neon sign. You saw the same with an old Morris Minor or a Mini. It would be lost with modern street lighting. To be fair, the street lighting has come on a lot as well. The most popular types are sodium vapour that has a yellowish tinge to it. and mercury vapour that has a blue-pink tinge to it. In the picture below, I discuss lighting, as a major upgrade can be now had, as we have found a hidden compartment. On the left is the lights I have on my bike. 2 backlights, that's 4 times 1.5 volt batteries, and a front light. All these are not very efficient or long lasting. Also the weight of the batteries, which is substantial for the performance that they give. The weight is carried high up on the cycle. In the middle is a 12 volt lithium rechargeable cordless drill battery, and it's nice and neat. We have made a hidden space now because we have pushed the crankshaft forward from its usual position, so there is room between the crank and the back wheel to fit a rechargeable lithium battery pack. Next is a 125cc motorcycle. All these have powerful 12 volt twin bulb headlights. The backlight, indicators, instrument panel, they all weigh next to nothing, as they are just an injection moulded plastic case with a bulb. These are already made in production for mopeds and scooters. It would be very easy to pinch some of these with little messing about or development costs. What an upgrade that would be for cycles with minimum effort and no extra weight high up on the cycle. Just one lithium battery, position low down. Another upgrade I would do for cycles is, on my Suzuki, the instrument panel had a warm orange glow, as the bike was well lit up, and on a cold day it did make a difference how you felt when you was out riding. Behind the screen at the front I will put 2 orange clocks. On the right a speedometer, and on the left a tachometer for counting the revs of the crankshaft. This will act to count your cadence while cycling. On a wet windy day, cycling behind a screen that had those 2 orange clocks, especially coming home from work at night, that would seem much nicer. Then all you have to do is clip your charger onto a battery pack. Frame construction. Let's have a look at frame construction, and I will give you my thoughts on how I think I should go about this. On the left in this sketch is the brazed construction that was popular until the 1960s. A casting that had been machined accepts the frame tube and is brazed in place. This finished in the 1960s with the introduction of butted tubing and the all-welded construction. You might think this is a better modern way of doing things, but that is not the case. It's a cheaper method of doing things. It's interesting to note with motorcycles, when the production machines swapped to the all-welded construction, the racing bikes still preferred the braze construction, as this allowed some flexibility in the joints and prevented stress cracks. The race teams continued with this until the swap to aluminium racing frames, as the production complexity was simplified with CNC machining that allowed things to be made from a solid billet of aluminium. With the introduction of butted tubing, this allowed a double thickness at the ends where the welds are. This was a key development, allowing the welded frames to come into the picture. Things moved on to triple butting for certain joint areas and stress areas. I was going to draw you a sketch of a mandrel to explain the process of butting tubing, but it's much better for you to look at Reynolds' tubing website. They have a good section of diagrams, and it's more advanced than I would have drawn. It looks to me like the triple butted tubing was a very key factor in allowing this frame design to come into existence, and the reason for that is you can specify where along the tubing length you want the triple butting. What that means is, if you have an area of high stress, increase the thickness of the tube wall at that point, and that was a key factor in the puzzle of sorting out this frame construction. Another problem I had, I really needed elliptical tubing because the load stress was very high, and that was a headache in itself because as far as I was aware, I hadn't seen elliptical tubing that had been bent. As an elliptical tube does not bend very well, it's not really compatible with the machines. There was a way around it though, because the bends are not very savage, so we should be able to bend the tube first, then put it under a press brake and crush it down to the size we need. A hydraulic press brake is a big industrial press as much as 16 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it can press up to hundreds of tons. It's computer controlled, so it will come down to the height that you set on the control panel. At this point, I thought I got a good rigid frame design and a method of producing it, so I could have a go at figuring out the sizes that I needed. The specialised frame I have now is 32mm outside diameter and 1.5mm wall thickness, and I would like an elliptical tube of 32mm width. I can sketch 2 tubes with an 8mm offset and work out the overall size I need using the line of chords. But that would not be accurate, because as the tube is crushed down, the top moves down and the bottom comes up, and that material has to go somewhere, so the overall length of the ellipse would increase. The best solution might be to get two tubes made for prototypes in 36mm and 38mm diameter, so I could do some test pieces. This will give a basis for working out a large and small frame size. What I'm looking for is the main rails on the large size frame to be 32mm wide and around 40mm high, with triple butted bends and double butted ends. I will produce a series of sketches, as it's always easier to understand things like this when you have some drawings in front of you. There's some tubing for you to look at here. Top left is a cross section through the specialised tubing I was using as a template. The diameter is 32mm with a 1.5mm wall thickness. Next I have put two together with an 8mm spacing, giving the 40mm depth. Next one is 32mm diameter for the first test piece. I have shown the thicker wall thickness to highlight the thicker section where the button is. Underneath we have the finished cross section of 32mm by 40mm. This is an approximation, but it will give the dimensions to work off and provide a base for stress testing on the finished tube profile. This sketch shows you the brazed and butted joints. On the brazed joint, the weld is highlighted in bronze colour, but that can be considered as the reinforcement on the joint, because due to capillary action, the molten bronze compound sucks itself along the joint line between the tube and the collar. It's strong, yet flexible. On the butted sketch, the triple button is shown on the left side of the tube and double button on the right side. This gives you a thicker section to weld onto and stops the welder from burning through the tubing. Yet you don't need that thickness all the way along the tube length and can save weight. As you can see, I'm thinking about a quality made machine here rather than a throwaway product, and that brings a problem of cost into the equation. I put some thought into that. Have a look at this next picture and see what you think of a possible solution. This is a Peugeot ATV that had been abandoned on the estate. It's 26-inch wheels, but smaller size frame for a teenager. The front wheel is missing and the back axle is snapped, but all the gears, brakes, handlebars, seat, they're okay, just a bit rusty. I took it on with me and sprayed it with an oil lubricant, then put it in the shed. The one I had before this was a BMX. I'd spotted that while I was going downtown on Thursday when people put the rubbish bins out, and a BMX was put out with the rubbish. It had no brakes, a flat tyre and a rusty chain, and as my daughter lived nearby, I picked it up and put it in her front garden so I could pick it up on the way back. After about 3 weeks I was coming back from the shop, and one afternoon when I got on the estate there was 3 kids about 6 years old playing. 2 of them had small mountain bikes and the other one didn't have a bike. I said to him, "Where's your bike?" He said, "I haven't got one." "Why have you not got one?" He said, "My mum's got no money." I said, "I can sort you out with a bike. Do you want to come and have a look at it?" So they came back to my garden. I showed him the BMX and a mountain bike I had that I could take the brakes off. I would only need to buy an inner tube and grease the chain up. I said, "Go and ask your mum if you can have it." And he came back 10 minutes later with his mother. I said to her, "Give me a few days to swap things over and pick up an inner tube." He knocked on my door every day at 5 p.m. until it was done. He said, "Is my bike ready?" I set it up for him with the seat height and the handlebar position, and off he went. The fact is, it was a good little bike. It only needed a bit of fixing, and it only cost me £3 for an inner tube. It keeps someone happy who didn't have a bike, and do a bit for recycling. That's what will happen with this Peugeot. If I don't give the bike to someone, I will take the parts off for another one. That leads me to something else. You wouldn't imagine seeing an original rally chopper thrown out with the rubbish. I know now that you can get £300 for an early frame. Same as you won't see an Aston Martin or a Jaguar in the scrap. Someone will have them. But if I'm thinking about a quality item, it has a price. And like a BMX, which is predominantly for kids, I suspect quite a lot of kids would fancy this bike, which might be a bit costly for them. There is an idea though. If you look at the pop stars that you know, there's Ariana Grande, Ellie Goulding, Pixie Lott, Ollie Moores, lots of them, they have their own fan clubs. And some might be interested in making a scheme available through the fan club where you pay, say, £50 down, then a monthly payment. And pop stars could do their own colour schemes, tiger skin seat covers, dress them up their own way. At least they will learn a bit about the environment and recycling, energy consumption and throwaway products. Football clubs are another area with a fan base. The clubs like Arsenal and Wolverhampton could have their own enamel badge and put on their own colours. Think about making a future collector's item. This is not my field, but it's an idea that could work. See what anyone thinks about it. I was just thinking, if you had a son or a daughter who wanted an ATC, even if you could afford to buy one cash, if they're involved with a pop star or a football club, it still might be better to buy one over 18 months payments. The reason for that is they will learn at an early age the responsibility of what things cost by filling in a payment book every month. Added to that, the understanding of environmental work and why cycling tracks are needed and how recycling works. They might not get that understanding if they're just given a new bike. Suspension. The suspension had me scratching my head for a while. Front suspension was simple enough, although it's not strictly necessary on a cycle. It will give a little advantage on the ATC because we have a tipping point on the frame with the seat being positioned on an outrigger. With rigid front forks, any bump on the front end can kick the front end up, so by putting the front suspension on it will smooth that out and stop the rocking motion. A bigger headache was the rear suspension. I dismissed using a shock absorber with only having a single top rail. This meant any suspension I used would have to be a pair, one on either side of the top rail. My next thought was the shock absorbing seat post, but this proved to be difficult to use. The problem being, on a conventional cycle frame, the shock absorbing seat post is mounted nearly vertical, and that was of no use to me because being mounted at the rear of the seat, the arrangement would have to swivel. The reason for that is like the rally chopper, the seat swivels when it moves up and down and forms an arc from its front mounting point. If I was to fit twin shock absorbers that swivel forwards and backwards, that would require a loose fit rather than a solid bolted connection. I thought that would end up giving me problems because as you pedal left-right, we get sideways moving and the surfaces could end up wearing out like the full suspension frame. After pondering over several different arrangements, I thought why not copy the rally chopper setup? After all, it worked well enough and it was nice and simple. There was another thought I liked, and that was an identifiable part. What I mean with that is, if you go into a supermarket to buy food or washing powder, any good brand name always makes you feel better, as they are more reliable, you know what you're getting. Names like Purcell, Ariel, Ovis, Birdseye, they have a comforting feel. And I thought the arrangement for the chopper's rear suspension was not only effective enough, but I also thought it was quite stylish looking as well. Right, so that's sorted. The thing now is to draw it out and see if I can make it fit. I think the arrangement should be okay, even though I'm using a single top rail. I think the arrangement I have for the seat should be sturdy enough also. With the shock absorbing of the suspension, it should cut down the worry I had about a resonance setting up in the frame members because the springs should take some of the sting out of the bodyweight bouncing up and down. I quite like the idea of copying some of the style of the chopper because it had a big impact on young kids in 1972. Everyone seemed to want one. And where I like the idea of having a good functional ATC, I also like the idea of having a stylish, good-looking bike that people could come to love. Dimensions. What this drawing represents is the basic dimensions to make the first prototype to, based on the 40mm by 32mm elliptical tubing. It's the ballpark figure we are intending to find. I'm a person who likes to pick things up and look at them, and this prototype would fit that. Also, at this point, you could get the opinion of others. I'm an experienced engineer and cyclist, but I don't know everything, so two heads are better than one. This gives you the opportunity to bounce thoughts and ideas off each other, which is always easier to do when you've got a lump of steel in front of you. I have put the min rad note on for the bends on the rails. This is to stop an artistic impression where you create sweeping curves that may, in someone's opinion, look stylish. There is a saying in engineering: a curved structure is either overstressed or overweight. By sticking to the minimum radius principle, you maintain the structural integrity and just live with the way it ends up looking. An intermediate sketch I did here. I will leave it in for you to browse the creative process. I've shown a scrap view on the arrows through the main frame rails and the rear strut. The enlarged detail of the joint is to highlight the reinforcement for welding. The frame rail was made elliptical to increase the depth for stiffness. When we come to weld on the struts, they would not pick up the full depth of the frame rail. To counter this, a shaped flat plate is positioned around the bottom of the tubing, which adds stiffness as this is the highly stressed area. I would turn over the bottom edge of the plate a few millimetres with a 90-degree bend. A similar detail is for the lower rail. Seat detail. This scheme represents the basic principle of how a suspension seat that is adjustable for height could work. By using a subframe, you can have 3-position movement sliding the seat assembly along the top frame rail. The backrest assembly is mounted onto the subframe, so that would move with it as a sub-assembly. I think that would work nicely, leaving us clear space to mount a rear rack and saddlebags for luggage carrying capacity. I wouldn't like to provide a bike without the facilities for carrying items. As for me, bikes are not leisure items. They are an essential life tool. I decided that I would draw a revised system for the axle where the chain wheel fits. The reason for this is I was a little concerned about ground clearance when cornering. I could modify the existing frame layout drawing. If I do that, you will miss the thought process behind it. So I will leave that drawing as it is, and I'll show you my new thinking. As I said previously, I get lots of things wrong when I do a new design, because I'm dealing with something that does not exist. But as the design builds up, you get to spot things you have previously missed. In the picture below, I measured the underneath of the pedal in its lowest position and the road surface, and that measures 127mm. This will be standard as the crank arms are 170mm. I was looking for a new crank on this bike, and I was just going to get a single front cog and have 7 gears at the back, as I only use this as a town bike. There are 175mm cranks available for the fixed wheel bikes. I had spotted a 180mm crank a few years ago, and that's why I drew one on the bike layout. The reason for that was, if you worked at a company and they had a fleet of cars, and they all had 1000cc engines, if one had an 1100cc engine, that would probably be a favourite, as it's a bit more go about it and a bit nippier. That's the same with the 180mm crank, a bit more power when in low gear and climbing a hill, and a bit faster in the high gear when on the straight. But what about the ground clearance? When the pedal is at its extremity. This specialised frame I'm working off is very much a standard in its geometry, and if you look at the rear fork arms, they slope down a couple of degrees, they all do. I suspect the reason for that was just to lower the seat height, because if that rear fork was horizontal with 26 wheels, that would be 13 inches to the centre of the wheel. Other wheels like 700mm or 900mm follows the same pattern. I suspect the lowering of the seat height dictates things, and the clearance available for the ground dictates the 170mm crank. We have already lost 1 inch with the 24-inch wheels, and we could lose another 10mm with the 180mm crank arm. That would take us down to 92mm ground clearance. Maybe a bit tight there. I think we better have a look at that one. There is no reason why those fork arms have to follow the standard pattern and slope downwards, because the height of the seat is not an issue for us. So I drew out this revised layout that gives 130mm road clearance with a 175mm crank arm, an increase in clearance and an increase in power. As I mentioned previously with the conversion diagonals on the frame struts, there is only so much I can do on a drawing board, and prototype testing is required. The ground clearance is a similar problem, but we now have a method of dealing with any eventualities. For me as a town or urban bike rider, I would prefer a single front cog with 40 teeth and an 8-speed Sturmey Archer or Shimano hub centre gear setup. Extra details. I've put some extra details here to consider in the drawing above, with there being a larger spacing now between the driving axle and the rear wheel. We will be better stiffening this area up a bit. Bottom right shows the standard arrangement. As we are using a smaller back wheel, The outside edge of the wheel moves backwards, and we have pushed the axle arrangement forward. A folded steel plate would stiffen this area up and stop any sideways flexing. The plate would also provide a mounting point for the battery and side stand. I think the single lithium battery is a good consideration for the future, as cycle tracks are on the increase, but I suspect the lighting on the tracks might not be as well lit up as the roads we are used to. I've also shown some mounting points for saddlebags and a back rack. I prefer things that are practical, and I also designed this cycle as a fun ride, a bit like a rally chopper. I also like the idea of the public being able to use this cycle for shopping trips along the cycle track network. I will change the story a little here and explain a recent event that happened to me. The picture above shows the specialised bike I have, which I just rebuilt. On the right, the road bike I was using. I went out last week and the derailleur wrapped around the back wheel and wrote it off. I think what happened there is the potholes on the roads this winter were the worst I've ever seen. The road bike has narrow alloy wheels of 700mm diameter and wasn't able to withstand this, and had a buckle in the wheel. The mountain bikes are 26 inch, which is 660mm, and they're more robust, but even so, the potholes were bad this year. I was going uphill in a low gear, so the derailleur swings inwards, and I think the tyre nicked the chain, causing a wobble. Then the derailleur hit a spoke and wrapped round the back wheel. The damage was a bent derailleur, spokes, rim, chain. The repair bill will be over £100. I could get a new bike for that. So I ended up walking about for a few days in the hottest part of the year while I try and make something out of the 4 non-running bikes I had. That Peugeot I had came to the rescue and provided gears and a back wheel to rebuild my mountain bike. That changed my opinion a bit because I spend £100 every year just on gears, and I will bring that to an end now. Next time I have to spend on gears, I'll buy one of those Sturmey Archer or Shimano 8-speed hubs, and that will probably last me at least 10 years. Another thing I would like to do is get rid of the chain drive and swap the belt drive. Motorcycles have had these for years and they're much cleaner than they ever used to be. Also, the grit sticks to the oil and grease on the chain, which accelerates the wear. I wouldn't like to specify for this bike it has to have those gears, as the cost is around £170 for an 8-speed hub, and that will be out of the range of a lot of people. But for me, I spend £100 a year replacing gears, as they are the main thing that wears out. There is a saying in engineering, waste is a design flaw, and with the index gears you see a prime example of that. This is the new arrangement I ended up with, a single front cog with 38 teeth and 7 cogs at the back. The standard 3-cog system on the front of the mountain bike has a central cog of 42 teeth. That is the most used in the urban environment, so a 38 tooth cog lowers the overall ratios, which is more nimble for the urban setting. This bike is not really intended for long road rides between towns, but with this ratio setup, it's quick off the mark. It's good for the stop-start traffic you find in the urban setup. Right, I think I can leave you now with one last drawing. I've covered just about everything a design draftsman can do on a drawing board. We have a new member for the cycling family, a nice little baby we can all sit back and watch it grow. The more the cycle network expands out, the more the ATC will flex its considerable muscles. As more people take to it, you should see more clothing and products appear, as everyone has something cute to play with, and the feel-good factor should be high with this product. I started work in 1976, the heatwave summer, and this year, 2018, has been the match of that. One area that has caused alarm bells to ring loudly is the area covered by the heat is 100 times bigger than it was in 1976. There has been large fires all over the place, north and south of England, Greece, Spain, Portugal, California, Australia. A pleasant ride along the canal bank or down to the shops on the ATC would take some of the stress out of your system as you make a conscious decision to leave other transport behind and cycle instead. You might never get the recognition for your greatest achievement, but do it anyway.